All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 43 today, and we're going to be talking about Alchemy and Ibogaine with Alex, the head of the Natural Born Alchemist Podcast. Check us out at Mike and Maurice mindescape.com and patreon.com/ Mike and Maurice. So without further ado, we have Alex here. How you doing, Alex?
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. So we had been going back and forth a little bit on Twitter. I checked out your page. Actually, the odd thing is I had listened to your podcast a couple times, and I really liked it. The format's really cool. You do a lot of interviews, but you also piece, clips together, and like I was saying, like sound effects and different stuff. So you actually kind of have a really cool um, format for your podcast, because most people kind of do the same thing or just different versions of the same thing, but I found yours kind of refreshing in that way. So but let's start out with alchemy, because I do know a bit about alchemy. We've never done an episode on it on the show, but why don't you describe what you think alchemy is, or your definition of alchemy?
Well, I've been studying alchemy for probably 20 years, and I don't consider myself an expert in what is called practical alchemy or laboratory alchemy. I'm more interested in the spiritual aspects, although I consider both spiritual alchemy and practical alchemy to be equal. I mean, you need both to have the complete picture of alchemy. But where I am a bit different than more traditional alchemists is the traditional alchemists, they work with minerals or plants or substances, and they try to somehow create either the elixir of life or the philosopher's stone, which can transmute any substance into gold. And that's where I think they got a bit wrong. Um, Whereas, with my experience studying shamanism, I have come to recently actually to the conclusion that alchemy is basically the modern version, and modern I mean 2000 years, a modern version of shamanism, because what the shaman does is actually alchemy. The shaman is working with plants and substances and creates potions, and with the shamanic work they do create lead into gold, but more in a spiritual sense. But in essence, alchemy is about transforming one thing into another thing.
So now, hypothetically, like, so what you're saying is it's somebody that can transfer, transmute, or whatever. I mean, I agree with you from the spiritual end of things. That's the alchemy that I've studied a little bit about and learned about. I've read, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth and all that kind of stuff, talking about how the purpose of humanity is to transmute darkness into light, is pretty much what I got from that book. But if you are, let's say you grow pot, would just that consider you kind of like an alchemist from a practical standpoint, or would it be somebody that turns pot into like an extract type of a thing?
I think you would have to turn it into an extract, but also if you work with cannabis, you can, you could just sit around and smoke it and not do anything about it. But if you consciously ceremony, like eat a lot of it and
Right.
go forward that way, it becomes more like spiritual alchemy. There is actually a book, I did a podcast a while back called um, actually I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically I was talking to this alchemist who was making alchemical elixirs from cannabis specifically. So it's a whole science in itself, you could say. And these elixirs are like a stronger or more healing version of just cannabis as it is.
So I recently just read a paper somebody else posted online, another group I'm in, Tail Leaders, and one of the articles was about a study they did with um, default network mode. Are you familiar with that with the brain where, you know, we go when we do psychedelics, you kind of people have this like reset or ego dissolving experience. But in this one paper, they were describing how pot um, allows you to keep the ego through that. So it's like the one psychedelic that allows you to stay within that ego realm, but in the default mode network. What do you think about that in terms of compared to other psychedelics? Do you see that, or is that just, do you think it's people not respecting it as much as the other ones since people do it kind of on a daily basis, usually people that use it?
Yeah, I can't really answer because I've never used cannabis in a good way. I more used it as a drug.
No, that's you're honest, man. I mean, I appreciate that.
And I've stopped. I don't know if you're all familiar with the Graham Hancock story of when he went down to the Amazon and the ayahuasca told him to stop smoking.
Yeah.
Well, exactly the same thing happened to me. So I also stopped.
Maybe I should stop.
Was that that was an ayahuasca experience or just a general kind of like an enlightenment moment, or what was going on there?
Well, the reason I started smoking cannabis was because it made me feel normal. So it actually made me normal. But then working with ayahuasca for a few years, eventually the ayahuasca said to me, which sounds strange, but it told me that, it's over now. You don't need this anymore. And I don't need it anymore. I'm normal. I feel normal without it, So because like maybe once a year, I have friends in Amsterdam. So once a year, I might go to Amsterdam. I might smoke a joint. But when I do, 10 years ago, I could smoke 10 joints and, do my taxes. But now if I smoke like 2 puffs, I almost faint.
No tolerance.
I'm actually allergic to it now. So it's because before I needed it to be normal. Now, when I'm already, when I'm cured in that aspect, it becomes too much.
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of the people that have these ayahuasca experiences, they come out of it and they normal life is enough for them, it seems. They don't need drugs or whatever. Maybe that's the goal we all need to strive to get to.
I'm not against cannabis, though. It's just not for me.
Yeah. I mean, I had really bad OCD. I've used plant medicine to heal myself with, CBD, THC extracts. And I also, in the past, when I was younger, used psilocybin, because and they're actually doing a lot of research with that right now for healing depression and anxiety and stuff like that too, microdosing it. So I do think that there's something to all that. Like you said, you fixed yourself, and then the same thing for me. I don't need to do anything else now because I reset myself, rewired my brain kind of in a way, and got back on a normal, path, or at least carved a new path. So I can definitely relate to that. What, in terms of the alchemy realm, you said, more of a spiritual side of things. Is there any books that you've read or any research that you've done that's kind of taken you in a direction where you've had some sort of synchronicities, or is it just something that you've always been geared towards?
Well, I'm kind of a bibliophile, so I actually collect alchemical books, and I love those books. So it's hard to point at a particular one. It's also to digest into a few sentences because it's almost like a synchronistic chaos alchemy. But one of my favorite alchemists is this guy called Paracelsus, who was like he's a forgotten Leonardo da Vinci, you could say. Like, most people don't know who he is.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
He was a genius, and he's the only he's also very respected in the alchemical communities, but he's the only, with Paracelsus, I found a direct link between psychedelics and alchemy, because my argument is that the Philosopher's Stone is DMT, but an alchemist will say there's no proof. So it's all, the proof is more like the way you interpret things. But they can't prove they're right either, because it's all written in code. So, but Paracelsus in like 1520, like 500 years ago, he was traveling a lot throughout Europe, because he was a doctor, but he viewed the doctors of his day as money grabbing imbeciles and morons.
Okay.
And he was quite vocal in his disgust for how they were practicing medicine. And he was always chased out of town because he was so truthful. And he wrote his book in the common tongue. In those days, you wrote in Latin, so normal people couldn't really know what the doctors knew, but he wrote his books in normal language. And he always went traveling to find the housewives, because he viewed them as having the greatest knowledge of medicine, which is kind of like the old wise woman, or, you know, in those days, you know, the mother of the family. She knew all the cures.
Right.
And at one point he got kind of kidnapped by the Tartars, which are the the people of Genghis Khan. And they're a shamanic, nomadic kind of tribe, and they are close to the Amanita muscaria tradition of psychedelic use.
Siberian shamanism, right? Because, I mean, if you look at Amanita muscaria, a lot of it's predominantly Siberian. You look at like northern Russia, northern, that area.
Exactly, and when he was with them, he started out as a captive, and then he became, their friend, and he became regarded as a healer and a holy man. And I think it is there where he had a shamanic experience. But all this is just interpretation, of course.
So did he ever write that in any of his work, that he had an experience with Amanita muscaria, or?
No, proof like that doesn't exist. But
Gotcha.
He's the only alchemist that had connection with direct connection with a shamanic tribe, because otherwise they keep to themselves.
Right.
Because if you really study the laboratory part of alchemy, and even the allegorical parts, and you study shamanism, it is, to me anyway, it's very clear that it goes hand in hand. And even the way they use their symbols in their art, the shamans or the alchemists, is very similar. So I think the alchemist is just a modern form of shamanism. And the difference is that the really modern alchemists these days, they are only interested in laboratory work. So they've forgotten the spiritual side.
And just to note, though, go ahead. Sorry,
I was just gonna say, a lot of scientists or whatever have forgotten that spiritual side.
Absolutely. I was just gonna say, with our modern technology and everything, obviously you can look at the ancients and say they had maybe more of a spiritual side of things that we don't have anymore. Well, I think since we have more of a technological side, I mean, if you look at what they're able to do, they are able to turn most metals into gold. I mean, you can look it up. There's different programs that have it on there, but it's not a lot. Like they take it's like a minute amount. And what they do is they change the format, through this process, and they're able to turn, mercury or, iron, different things into gold, but it's like a very small amount. It wouldn't be worth it to do it on a practical level because of how much time and effort and everything it costs to do.
I can add that Paracelsus, there is some writing of him where he just says that the medicine of the Tartars was rooted in faith and imagination and drawing on herbal remedies. I mean, it's quite close to just saying psychedelics, I think.
Right. When was he alive, roughly?
500 years ago.
Okay. So it was more of like the kind of what Maurice was talking about, the almost the scientific revolution where there was art and science and everything kind of combined into one.
Yeah, he was a bit earlier. He was one of the few people who started to see that people who were mentally insane were not insane, because in those days they were locking them up. And he has this famous quote that is most known for, even people who are not into alchemy might have heard it, and it goes like, it's everything. I mean, no, how does it go? It goes, the difference between poison and medicine is dosage.
That
Hell
makes
yeah.
sense.
So it looks like he was born in 1493 in Switzerland.
Yes,
How long
exactly.
How long did he? What age did he die? Does it say?
Yeah. Not
Not
his age,
that
but he
old.
died. He died in 1541. So
Okay.
you don't want my math skills. We'll be here all night.
So yeah, I mean, look, I think a lot of these guys, they're probably just tons of tinkering going on. Do you think that some of these guys during that age, forget about like the Mayans and different things, but do you think some of these Europeans and different people that were studying all this stuff, do you think they knew about DMT and all that kind of stuff? You know, you mentioned Amanita muscaria, but do you think, because there's a lot of suggestive stuff out there about ancients using DMT and that kind of stuff too. I mean, I just read the DMT and the Soul of Prophecy by Rick Strassman, and that's kind of about more of a religious base where it's almost like God's handpicking people for these DMT releases is kind of what the takeaway from that book is. But do you think that these were just experiences they were having, or do you think they were creating this stuff, or what do you think in terms of that realm?
I'm not sure about the DMT. I mean, the one you can smoke. I mean, I've heard different versions, and some say it's they didn't have the equipment to extract the DMT, but I've been thinking lately about how could you extract DMT without using modern equipment or techniques. But the mushroom is everywhere.
That's
and
true.
I'm pretty sure they use that in some way. I wouldn't be surprised. I did a podcast recently where somebody said to me that they have lots of friends who smoke cannabis every day, but if you look in their diaries, there's not one mention of it. Meaning
That's
that
interesting, yeah.
But on the other hand, if you look in my diaries, that's all I talk about. So I don't know.
Well, aren't these basically diaries? Like, isn't your podcast kind of a diary? I mean, I know ours kind of is. We've talked a lot about personal stuff and different things. So, I mean, in a way, I mean, I don't know how much you share of your personal stuff on your podcast, but I know from listening to your podcast, there's a lot of stuff that you relate to, that you're the episodes about and stuff like that. And same thing for ours. We try and relate our personal experiences the best we can to the topic at hand. So, if everybody would go back and listen to every single one of your podcasts or one of our podcasts, they'd probably be able to put a picture together of a roundabout of what we've been studying or doing, kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. And I'm a big one of my creeds is the Terence McKenna thing about direct experience. So that's really the only thing I can talk from. So I mean, nobody knows. We've been talking about alchemy. Nobody knows, and nobody has direct experience from those times. So I can only speak of the direct experience I have had studying this stuff myself. But I mean, I guess it's as good as anybody else's.
Now, the most famous quote's probably "as below, so above; as above, so below," kind of a thing. That's obviously the most famous one. Do you believe that's true from what you've studied?
Yeah, it also goes as without, so within. The nice thing with alchemy is, because it talks about what that quote describes is the macrocosm and the microcosm, and alchemy can seem complicated when you start reading those alchemical books, but if you really get into it and you try to look at the world from an alchemical's perspective, it starts to make sense. It's kind of like seeing the Matrix, because if anything big that happens in your life also happens in a small way, or if you're like feeling a certain way, the city you live in seems to be in that way, and how the universe looks is also what it looks like if you use a microscope and go way deep into when you look in a
Quantum
microscope.
level.
Yeah, quantum level looks quite similar. And so and the galaxy can look like an eye and all that stuff. So I think it's all as above, so below. It's all very similar, because most religious people, and the problem, I don't think it's like that from the beginning, but the problem with the major religions is that they view nature and God as separate, whereas more in alchemical terms, they're just more yin and yang. So they're the same thing, and so it's above, so below. It's just different states. And like Paracelsus says, because there's no such thing as unnatural, and there's no such thing as poison or medicine. It's just dosage. I mean, nuclear power is bad, but in the right dosage, and in the right setting where it should be, maybe it shouldn't be above ground or where people are. Maybe it should be in space in a certain dosage in a spaceship or something. Maybe they use
radiation. Yeah, they use radiation to cure cancer too, but that same radiation can give you cancer as well.
Yeah. So it's all in the dosage and how you look at it. Nothing's really good or bad. It's just perspective.
Well, it's an interesting take too, because like you said, you look into an eyeball and it looks like anybody that's tripped or taken something and looked in the mirror and looked intensely into their own eyes. It's a whole different ball game when you start doing that. But
what about the DMT molecule and how it resembles? What is that? What was that star?
Well, our buddy Aaron Voot wrote a book called Spirit in the Sky, where he correlates the Orion constellation to the chemical structure of DMT. It kind of resembles it from the standpoint of the hunter looking thing. So but yeah, I mean, that's all his takeaway from that too, is so as above, so below. What I was going to say is look at our bodies, and I was thinking about this the other day. If you have some sort of like messed up gut or leaky gut or something, you're craving this bad shit and you're eating all this terrible stuff, or you've got some sort of disease or whatever, and it's causing you on a micro level. These things in your body can determine what you want to eat, how you're going to feel, so and we kind of do the same thing externally. But I just was thinking into that, like, we're not even in control of our own bodies all the time too. Some of the chemical makeup that we have within us determines things that we do. So
yeah, that's true. And I think also, if you look at your gut as your alchemical furnace, and that's more how the shamans, I mean, the way you treat your stomach, the stomach is the most important part of the body. It's the engine. So, and what happens when you put like sugar in a car, where you put the gas?
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah.
Same kind of thing. So you can look at the body as an alchemical laboratory, and if you really go down that rabbit hole, you can you can talk about that for hours, but it's quite complicated. But
well, I mean, that's where most of our serotonin is too. So I mean, isn't that the whole purpose of an ayahuasca thing? Is obviously to disable the serotonin or the receptors with the MAOI inhibitor, and then allow the DMT to get in there and do its thing. So, but what's your take on the whole Ibogaine treatment thing with in terms of treating people with drug addiction? I know that's anything I've searched for it online and done research. Like I said, I don't know a ton about it. It's probably, I've tried most of the other psychedelics, know a lot about them, but Ibogaine's one of those ones where I know very little about. I know
I've never even heard of this shit.
I know it comes from Africa. I know, what is it? The Pygmy tribe was the first to synthesize it or use it in a lot of their ceremonies, is what I read. But why don't you describe it and talk about the effects and how it can help people?
Yeah, well, they don't really synthesize it. Ibogaine is.
I just mean turn it into the. Isn't that the byproduct of Iboga tree though?
No, well, it's like this. Iboga, or sacred wood, as it's called. That's why I like to refer to it as holy wood, like Hollywood. Holy wood.
It's probably a lot more productive than actual Hollywood.
Iboga, it is called Tabernante Iboga, and it's a root. And you churn that or grind that root into powder, and that's what you eat. You don't need to do anything. It's finished. It's like the mushroom. Just grind it and eat it. Ibogaine is an extract from Iboga, and Ibogaine is just one of, I think, like 10 or 11 compounds. So Iboga is the complete thing. Ibogaine is just a tiny part of Iboga. And the reason these like treatment centers around the world to heal addiction is using Ibogaine is because it's easier to use. You can, when you extract it, you can make sure it's exactly the same amount for each patient, and it goes through your system quicker. So after like 24 hours, you should be normal. The trip is completely over and you can be cured in that. But the problem with Ibogaine is that it's not Iboga. It's only a little part of it.
Sure.
Because the Iboga contains a lot of other things that nobody knows really what they're doing. But it's more of a complete medicine, whereas Ibogaine might focus on just this addictive bit. Iboga is more an all-round cure. That's why with ayahuasca, if you smoke DMT, that's just 50% of the ayahuasca. Mm-hmm. The other is the chacruna bit in the ayahuasca. But the ayahuasca bit in ayahuasca is the MAOI inhibitor. But it's not only that, it's also very a good substance to clean out parasites and those kind of things in the body. So it's very, just to eat the ayahuasca on its own without the chacruna, it's also a medicine.
Right.
So I've only done the Iboga. I haven't done the Ibogaine. It's more like a modern thing. And like I said, Ibogaine, after like 24 hours, you should be back to normal. But Iboga can last for weeks.
Wow.
And I had a friend who was, it took him a little over a week to be normal, but it took him at least a year to feel completely like normal. So it can be very long. My own, he's quite sensitive, but my own experience lasted a few days. So it wasn't too bad. And the thing, when you do the Iboga ceremony, you eat as many spoons of this powder as you want. So that's why, unlike Ibogaine, if you eat 50 spoons or if you eat 10, it depends. And how big is the spoon? It's hard to measure, so.
Right.
Is the Ibogaine adding anything? Like you said, there's different components to it. Is it is the extract, do they add external things that are not part of the iboga tree? Is that what you're saying? Or is it kind of like all the derivatives, almost like eating pot, how it breaks down differently in your liver than actually smoking pot, kind of a thing?
If Iboga is Coca-Cola, then Ibogaine is just the sugar, not the
Okay, I
other
gotcha.
things,
Okay.
So it's like just one tiny bit of the pie.
Can they be different concoctions too, or is it all usually the same concoctions to make the ibogaine?
No, it just extracts what they have termed Ibogaine from the Iboga.
Gotcha.
It's like just take out that one bit,
One component.
and then,
Okay.
yeah, and throw away the other 10 bits.
So it is similar then to maybe doing an ayahuasca ceremony as opposed to just smoking the DMT, like you said. It sounds like that's the best analogy.
Yes, I prefer ayahuasca over smoking DMT because it feels like it's missing something. And Ibogaine I haven't tried, so I don't know, but Iboga would be the same equivalent, and it's
was the trip
also
like?
natural.
Okay. What was your trip like? Like what was the experience like?
Well, I've done Iboga twice. One time in Gabon in the traditional setting, and then one time at home because I know some Iboga people in England, and they sent me a few pills. I mean, it wasn't pills, but they just emptied pills and put Iboga in it.
Right.
Just a small dose. And for me, I mean, I don't know how it is for anybody else, but the interesting thing with Iboga is that all the other psychedelics are, visually stunning, very colorful. And even though you can see things that are realistic, like maybe you can see, if you see a snake or a being or something, it's all a bit fantasy. Like it can look a bit weird. It might be realistic, but it's not a 100% human being. Or if you see a cat in a vision, it is a cat, but it might be a green yellow cat glowing. Or I mean, it's hard to explain, but you know what I mean. Like it's
right.
It's
like flowing patterns. Like it's stuff that's already there, but it's just kind of transformed a little bit.
Yeah, it's like it's more magical and Alice in Wonderland and like fantasy kind of thing.
Right.
But Iboga is real. I mean, it's there's no. I mean, if you see a person, that's a person. You don't. It's not. That's why it can be extremely confusing when it lasts for a few days, because if you're still in the trip, I mean, if I take ayahuasca now and I walk down the street, I can tell the difference between my trip and the street. But with the Iboga, there's no difference. It's the same. It looks the same.
Damn.
So that's been my experience, and it's and the interesting thing with it is that the people, I mean, on ayahuasca, I've seen strange beings, or what you would call aliens. I don't know what they were. On DMT, even weirder creatures. But on Iboga, all I've seen as far as beings has been ancestral Africans.
That's interesting.
Like black people from thousands of years ago, and super realistic. I mean, like you could shake their hand.
Do you think you were maybe like tapped into some other metaphysical thing, or do you think this was your imagination concocting this, or what do you think was going on? Because what you're saying, if you do believe in the metaphysical, you could have been very well seeing something that you wouldn't normally be able to see not on it.
Well, the bewitted, that's what it's called, this kind of tradition. they say that, and the shamans in that tradition is called Ngangas, they say that no, that's what you see. I mean, that's why you take Iboga, you meet your ancestors.
It's interesting. Have you ever had that experience on anything else? I know you said they're different, but have you ever had, I know people see ancient people on ayahuasca and stuff like that. I know usually when people smoke DMT, it's a little bit more intense and they see aliens or love entities or whatever, but machine elves, people call them. So have you ever felt that on anything else, or was this the first time where you kind of felt like a connection to some sort of history to it?
I've felt it kinda in other times, but not like Iboga. It was so clear. In fact, I've told this on not on my own podcast a few times because it was so funny. But I remember, because the thing with the Iboga ceremony is you prepare for a week, then you do the ceremony, and then you try to get back to normality for a week. So you only do one ceremony.
Gotcha.
And at first I thought, like, because when I go down to Amazon, you do like 7 ceremonies in 10 days. So I was like, 1 ceremony in 2 weeks. And then when I had taken all the Iboga and the experience had started, after a while, I was a bit like upset because I'm thinking like, well, all these people here dancing, because there were people dancing and singing at the ceremony, but I was thinking like, oh, I must have done something wrong because I'm not getting any visions. I went all the way to Africa. Something went wrong. I don't know. It didn't work. I guess I'll have to just sit and watch these people dance and run around. And
People aren't real.
Yeah, I opened my eyes and I realized that it was not. It was. I mean, the vision was so real. I didn't even know I had it.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That sounds like I was watching this video. This guy was talking about a peyote. He took a lot of peyote, and he said he had a similar where he was meeting ancient Indian ancestors, and he thought he thought it was real life, but then he like kind of woke up from this like dream, even though he wasn't sleeping or anything. It's just kind of similar to kind of what you're describing right now. But from a standpoint of, let's talk about how it helps people, because I'm a big proponent of plant medicine helping people in certain scenarios. I know they're doing all these trials with PTSD and depression and anxiety, and from what I've read, the Ibogaine, like we said, helps people with drug addiction. Do you know anybody that's had an experience with that, or do you know anybody that's used it to help themselves get through something similar?
Oh yeah, I know quite a few people that have that's cured them. They've cured themselves with Iboga, and it is a kind of a miracle medicine when it comes to that. I only used it for spiritual and
Sure.
culture or interest in the indigenous culture, but I wouldn't recommend. I mean, I have one acquaintance that uses Iboga as part of their spiritual path. They use it now and again, and you can use it like that. But for me, it's too strong a medicine. If I would recommend anybody to, like, okay, take this psychedelic to work on your spiritual path, I wouldn't recommend Iboga.
What would you recommend?
No, then you could, mushrooms or ayahuasca if you want to go a bit deeper. But
I think mushrooms are the word, man. Honestly, I did them when I was younger a lot, like kind of just being a stupid kid. But like I said, there came a day where I was in a bad place, and after trying everything, pharmaceuticals and CBT therapy and actual going through the steps of all the stuff that they recommend and clinical stuff, just nothing helped. So, I think that it helps for people to know that there are other options out there if you are one of those people where conventional stuff is kind of let you down. So, but I do think that there's something about mushrooms that it's like a full effect. It's mind, body, spirit. I feel like it's everything. It's not just one of those components.
The only downside with the mushroom is that there might be the northern Russia and that, but it's either dead or very secretive. But there's no real traditional use of taking them. I mean, there were in Mexico also, of course.
Yeah, the Marina
but that,
Sabina.
yeah, but how she did it, I don't know. But with ayahuasca and Iboga, it's a clear, distinct way they do it. And I always say that, like, my healing ceremonies with ayahuasca and Iboga, 50% of it is not the substance; it's the ceremony. And so I would always, if people can, it's much better to try and do it with
So you're
those.
saying it's like the purge, the Ica Rose, all that kind of stuff that goes along with it when you're going through one of these ceremonies, the singing, the chanting, the blessings, all the different, little things that they do. I don't know, actually, do you ever watch Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia? Because I think he does a good job of showing the full, ceremony that you have to go through for a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it properly, no, but I know of it.
It's definitely worth checking out, especially since you're into all this kind of stuff. I highly recommend it. There's a few good episodes in there where, they make him the one where he goes down to, I think he's doing salvia with an ancient healer, and she's making him clean toilets and do all sorts of stuff beforehand, and he's purging and eating a certain diet and that kind of stuff. So, but I think, what you're saying makes sense. If you're going down for an ayahuasca ceremony, and don't they, I mean, in your experience, did they make you change your diet or do anything beforehand to take part in these rituals?
Yeah, I do a diet like a month before and a month after. So yeah, the diet is very important because it puts you in the right state of mind. It's kind of like stretching before you're going to do a, take part in the Olympics or something. You train and stretch before you actually compete.
Right.
I mean, you get more from it if you do that. And I try to do that when I do any psychedelic at home. I try to set a date and not do it on the spur of the moment. Work my way up to it and have a clear intention and do a lot of different rituals around it, because it does. I've tried not doing that and it was not good. So I think for me, I don't know, everybody's different, but that's how I like it. And it's because I just copy what I've seen the indigenous communities that I've done it with, how they do it. So I just copy what they do, because I'm thinking, well, they've done it for thousands of years probably, so they're probably onto something.
Yes, sir.
Is it a specific diet for like a specific ritual that you're doing, or is it just all you do the same kind of a thing, or what do you do? Like, what's your diet like?
Well, my diet, actually now my diet is always the same. It's evolved from my experiences, and I have a diet that's a bit, because I've been through them all. Sure. Vegan, vegetarian, eating meat, whatever you call them. Mm-hmm. I think mine is called microbiotic, but I'm not sure. Basically, it's a very simple diet. I eat everything as long as it's not a mammal.
Interesting.
Because my
like lots
theory,
of seafood and fish and that kind of stuff.
Well, or just vegetables. It doesn't matter as long as it's not a mammal. Because again, if you think in alchemical terms, mammal is cannibalism. And there's well documented scientific research that shows what happens if you're a cannibal. I mean, it's not good for communities that have been using cannibalistic diets, they usually become corrupt in their genes. It's not so good. And
so what do you think? It's like the hormones in the mammals, or anything from that aspect of things? Or do you think, because look, if you drink milk from a cow, we're not really supposed to be doing that. People point to that as like a big issue when it comes to like hormone even if you look at like adolescent kids, they've done studies of them drinking certain types of milk and stuff like that and having different hormone problems and mutations there. So, I mean, do you think it's something along those lines, or do you think it's something else?
Well, depends on what they pump into the cows, but if it's all natural,
well, here in the U.S., it's probably gross shit. I'm just gonna say the reason why European people are so skinny and they still, France, they're all eating all day long, but they're so skinny. It comes down to our wheat, how it's been genetically modified to have more of a harvest, than let's say a non-modified wheat. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we do here that they don't do in other places.
Yeah, I don't have anything against what people eat. I'm not like one of those vegan radicals or something like that. But
no, I think it matters though, for sure.
I just stay away from mammals because for me that would be cannibalism, and I think that because I was vegetarian for a long time. But after my many years of working with ayahuasca, I'm like, well, plants are more intelligent than animals. So, I mean, it would be more morally correct to eat animals. So that doesn't work. And so
I think Terrence McKenna said the same thing too. He said something. He's like, I'd be remiss or something if I'd eat something that's more intelligent than a lot of the animal life. I think he was talking about plants.
Well, a study just came out saying that mollusks are actually more complex creatures than plants are. So I don't know.
Yeah. So
like clams and stuff.
He's
oysters,
like, I got to go back to vegetarian now. Jeez.
I mean, basically also in alchemy perspective is everything is alive. There's no way you're gonna survive this life without killing something. So,
so do you think it's the least impact? You're looking for like the least footprint or least impact on that sort of a thing, or?
No, it's just like most people agree you shouldn't be a cannibal.
Right.
So I just extend that to all mammals. And
I mean, I'm a huge animal lover too. I think about that too. Sometimes I'm like, fuck this, even, chicken sometimes, but I do love chicken.
And the indigenous communities I've been with, they usually try to stay away from red meat, or they are their diet is similar. And they said one interesting thing is that because they might eat meat, but when they hunt, it's a bit different because it's very common in the African hunting tribes to make a connection with the animal and ask the herd to provide one of the animals, and then they follow that animal and eat it. So it's more like a trade kind of thing. But they said that when you eat the slaughter animal, and this always stuck with me, it was one of the Shipibo shamans or maestras. She said that when you eat a slaughtered animal in like a factory, in that the problem is not how what they put into the animal or what the animal has been eating, and that, or that you're killing an animal. The problem is that you're eating fear.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
So you're eating the wrong energy.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, that you could say that. I think a big one for that would be lobster. Boiling this thing, you can hear it screaming in the pot, and then ingesting that thing, even though it's a high-end delight. I don't know. I'd think twice about eating
and
lobster.
It is a delight, I'll tell you that.
But yeah, I can definitely I've actually heard that before, and it made a lot of sense, and especially when you bring it up now in the context of what we're talking about. That and do you think that it has something to do maybe that animals releasing some sort of fear endogenous chemicals that are not great for us?
They do release shit when they die.
Yeah.
They release all kinds of stuff.
So there might be something to that for sure.
I mean, it's a very complicated topic, but I think for me the most important thing is to try, and I've tried to do this as much as possible, is that whatever I eat, doesn't matter if it's a plant or an animal, I just try to be thankful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, something died so I can live, and one day I'll die, and So I think that's important. And I used to, when I was younger, because I used to, like, in my mind, ridicule those that prayed before they ate their food.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
But I see it from a different perspective now. I mean, I ridicule they pray to Jesus for their food, but I've more like come around now to the thing that, I don't pray for the food. I'm more like just grateful for the
Right.
food, and I hope it didn't suffer too much, or send my love to wherever it is.
Well, I think, I mean, if you look at like what you're doing, what we've been trying to do, I think there's this whole like little movement happening with podcast, YouTube, different platforms where people are waking up to this stuff. And I don't think you necessarily, like you're saying, you can change things or do things, but I think it has more to do with just being conscious of it and aware of it and respecting things and understanding things. And I think we're a society that's kind of lost its spirituality, whether you're religious or not. I do think that even if you don't believe in Jesus or God or whatever, you can still have personal spirituality. And I don't think that there's a lot of people out there that think along those lines anymore. Everybody's just pretty much a reductionist and not even know it. They're just born into this world. They think that's all there is, and they think that's all there will be. So I think that has a lot to do with the choices people make too. They're like, oh, this is my one time around, I'm going to do what I want to do and not think about it. So
yeah, I remember when I was younger, I became at one point a hardcore atheist, and I completely, like a punk rocker, hated all religions. But
Yeah.
now, today, all religions are my religion. None is better. I like them all. I study them all. Because you have to remember that it's not the priest in the church or in the imam in the mosque. That's not the religion. And
Right.
what those institutions have done, that's not the religion. I'm looking at I'm trying always to look at what's it actually, what are those texts saying, what's in the religion, and the root always goes, it always comes back down to some sort of pagan, which is even later, but
Right.
shamanism. It all comes down to shamanism. So I would say that shamanism is my religion, but shamanism is not really a religion. But all religions are interesting, and I like them all. And I sometimes, like, people get confused like that, because sometimes I might be like, a few months ago I was heavily into Hinduism for a while, and then after that I was immersed myself in Islam, and I just it's like watching different TV series. I just
Right.
binge that religion for a while, and you always learn something from them.
They
they're
all
all
have something to
interesting.
offer.
I remember a few Christmases ago, I was listening to this. I don't know if you know Krishna Das. He chants Hare Krishna.
I think I've heard him on Duncan Trussell's podcast a couple times.
Yeah. I was listening to his music it was Christmas. I was listening to his music, and I was reading a book about Sufism, which is the mysticism of Islam. And it was on Christmas Eve, and we were celebrating Jesus Christ, So I was like combining all three at once.
Bro, whoa.
No, I mean, we talked about that on like one of our first episodes. I never understood why all the religions couldn't at some point come together and at least find the common ground. There is common ground. I mean, like you do, I also do. I research and study all the religions. I grew up Roman Catholic, but towards my teens started to be like questioning things, and I almost at an early age had blind faith and thought, oh, everybody goes to heaven, and oh, this is how it is, and that's not how it is at all. And I think that I'm not saying that there's not another plane or there's life after death. I do believe that there is those things. I just don't believe it's being represented in the right way, or maybe it's big game of telephone where it's passed on so many generations or so many years where it's kind of lost its actual message, if you will. But I do the same thing, but except, for me, I look at the commonalities between everything. And as much as all these religions hate each other, and there's been wars and holy wars and all sorts of stuff, some of them do have common messages, and they just don't realize it.
Yeah, that's true. And when many of those religions were formed, they didn't hate each other. It's more a later thing,
Right.
I mean, all the different prophets usually spoke well of the other prophets of different religions. I mean, when you call something Christianity and Islam or whatever you call it, that's something we put a name on those things, many years later. So it wasn't
like
called those things in the time, It's like we don't know what our era right now is going to be called in 100 years, Is it going to be called like the
gonna be called
Renaissance
idiocracy.
or idiocracy?
The turds.
No, I mean, I agree with you. It's like we don't have the perspective. I mean, we think we're so advanced because of our technology and stuff, but like I just said, we've lost so many, I think, messages from the past that, I mean, that's why I study all that stuff. You brought up Graham Hancock. That was like one of my first catalysts, was getting Fingerprints of the Gods a few years ago, and then getting back into personal spirituality, esoteric knowledge, that kind of, I mean, I read this book. We talked about a lot on here too, the Urantia papers. There was a lot of cool stuff in there. And I never dive wholly into anything, but I like to take pieces of certain things that resonate with me, and I think that's ultimately leading to the truth for myself. Not that you have to take these things at what they are as a whole and believe it wholly or have faith in it like that. But I think if you take the messages from these things, you can use them for good stuff in your own life.
Also with psychedelics, I really enjoy the psychedelic perspective because it always feels so fresh. It's like a year or two ago when the debate about a round or spherical Earth or a flat Earth was very popular.
It's still going on, baby.
It's still raging. Yeah,
Anyway, when I entered those debates, people talking about, no, it's round, it's flat. I always went, there is no Earth.
Right.
It doesn't exist.
We could be a simulation or a hologram. I mean, that's we've talked about that on here too. There's no reason not to think that we're not, not necessarily like robots, but the way we look at robots, I mean, think about it. We can build these things that build other things, or we can build things with intelligence. Who's not to say that we're not that to something else,
There is it's called Aluna. It's a very good film. Everybody should check it out. It's about an indigenous group in Colombia, I think, and they're called the Kogi, and they have a creation myth that I find really good. And basically, they call their god is Aluna, and basically it goes something along the lines of she was the mother, and she conceived the world in darkness, as she conceived us as ideas, like how we imagine a house before we build it. That's how she did it. She spun the thread, spinning us in the story, creating us in thought, and then came the light, and the world was real. That's the one I like. I've heard that's the one I like the most of all the different creation myths. But this thing about it's just a thought, a dream.
Well, that's kind of like Gnosticism a little bit, like Sophia emanating from God. Is what you just said kind of reminded me of.
That's true. And Gnosticism is also, I chart it like this: shamanism into Gnosticism into alchemy. If it's very simplified, that's how I look at it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, and the first time I started reading about Gnosticism, I was like, this is a little crazy. But then the more I thought about it, I'm like, there's a lot of thought-provoking stuff in there. And like I said, when we were just talking about religions, even if you don't believe something, to just think of it as an idea might give you more insight on yourself or your own life or what's going on for you, you know? So that's why I like all that stuff.
Yeah, I love the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip.
Yeah.
I read them a lot, and there's many
What's the
of
one
those.
part in Gospel of Thomas where the kid fell off the roof and they thought Jesus pushed him off the roof, and then he brought the kid back to life, and the kid tells everybody, no, Jesus didn't kill me. I mean, that's probably one of the most mystical things that out of the Gospel of Thomas.
Mhm. I like the bit about if you don't receive the resurrection while you live, how will you receive it when you die?
Right.
So that's why I always try to do a psychedelic ritual during Easter.
What do you think about the whole San Pedro thing being St. Peter, like the key to heaven kind of a thing? What do you think about that?
I actually never heard that, but why not? But although it's two completely different continents.
Right. No, it is. But it seems like I was talking about Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, when he goes to South America, a lot of these rituals are based on Jesus. These shamans are using almost Christianity and Jesus and Catholicism as like a platform.
I can explain that. They do that in Gabon as well. That they're actually using Catholic words or images sometimes. The reason for that is persecution, because those shamans in Africa and Latin America, they were devil worshippers, and they tried to kill them all. And the only way to survive was to, okay, we're not praying to Mother Ayahuasca, we're praying to the Virgin Mary. And that's why. So it's just that it's the same with alchemy.
It's almost like a mask just to get through the door, kind of, or do your thing. Keep doing your thing.
Just leave me alone. It's the same with alchemy. Alchemists were also killed because they were devil worshippers or doing
sorcerers,
satanic stuff, and so that's why it's all coded, you know.
So do you think, though, now that these cultures, it's been part of that for a while, do you think these people, is it still they know of what you're talking about as it being a mask, or do you think that they've embraced Catholicism now because it is some sort of like handed down thing, and they don't know about what we're talking about as it being a mask?
Well, if you really get into the, like, for instance, the Jesus story, and you study the New Testament, and you study the Gnostic Jesus, and you really look into it and try to understand his concept of love, and then you take ayahuasca, and you will experience Jesus energy. You call it Jesus or Mother Ayahuasca or wisdom, it's the same. So it doesn't really matter, actually.
Yeah,
it's just words.
Yeah.
Well,
so
I was gonna say, though, what do you, in terms of like, you look at some work like are you familiar with Rudolf Steiner and like Christ consciousness and that kind of stuff?
I'm familiar, not I haven't read any of his work, only secondhand, like other people have written about him, that kind of thing.
Do you think it's possible to maybe tap into that kind of an energy through, just working on yourself and taking these things? Do you think it's possible to tap into what some people would consider this Christ consciousness, which is like this plane of not necessarily enlightenment, but just an introspective person that's going above and beyond to do the right thing and be a good person and that kind of stuff? Or do you think that we're all just animals still trying to figure it out?
Oh, you can get pretty close. It's very hard. You have to really work on it every day.
Absolutely.
But
it's not our nature, that's for sure.
But I have in one ayahuasca ceremony many years ago, I did during the ceremony enter the complete full understanding of what it would feel like and what the God energy feels like, and to see everything. I don't like the word God. I usually use the term divine mystery, but it doesn't matter what you call it. But God, I guess most people call it. I had, and so I have had that experience. I mean, it was the most powerful moment. I would probably class it as one of my daughter and that is the two most spectacular moments in my whole life. It was completely, I mean, it's undescribable, and it's so powerful. And because anger and hate can feel very I mean, perfect example is the Star Wars, where he gets attracted to the dark side, and you do feel the power. It's very powerful, and
it's easier to go along with it than it is to do the right thing. It's easier to do the wrong thing, keep feeding into it like a snowball, than it is to just do the right thing the first time. Because it's, again, I think it's against our nature.
But this divine energy, it's like, that anger, hate, or evil, or whatever you want to call it, it's nothing. It's nothing. It doesn't have a chance.
What was it like? Was it like pure awareness and like?
It was just pure awe.
Okay.
And
I don't think he's going to be able to explain it to us.
No, I know. I like asking people though, because I like to hear all the different things so I can get an idea.
Well, it was like it was the most beautiful thing you could ever see. It was just energy, eternal. It was warm, loving, and it was like, infinite and indestructible. And I mean, the way you would cry if you saw a loved one die in front of you, like the way you would cry in a different way than watching a movie. You would cry this like complete, like you breaking down kind of crying. I cried like that, but not from sorrow, from complete awe. I mean, it was it can't really describe it, but
that was pretty good. I mean, that was a good description. Actually, that's a common thing that you hear is pure love. Pure infinite love is a common thing I've heard with most people that have those experiences. We'll ask you one more question and we'll get out of here. But after all your studies and all your, alchemy and taking all these psychedelics, you said you were a hardcore atheist. Do you believe in one God or a creator, or do you just believe that we are just, I think a lot of people that do psychedelics think that we're the universe experiencing itself, or, like that type of a thing? Like, what's your takeaway from all this? Is this it, or were we created? Is there more to it?
I think I like the term divine mystery, and we're in it, and that's, I mean, you will never really understand it. Mm-hmm. So it's better to like embrace the mystery and love the mystery rather than to try and waste time and completely understand it. It's good to understand it in the sense that how to improve your own life, but you'll find out when you die. And I imagine that when you die, the mystery will become even bigger. I don't think it would be like, oh, here are all the answers. It's just like
it's just like another level. Like maybe we're in 3D right now, maybe 4D's just another version of the same thing.
But I do think it's important to think that I do believe that whatever spiritual evolution I do now it continues. I don't think you die. I think it's just like waking up from a dream and then you continue. So if you waste this life, you're just going to waste the next one. It's just you better get on the horse now and do something.
Baby, ride.
That's some great insight, actually. So, but thanks for coming on. Let's plug your stuff, your website. What's your website?
Oh, it's just Natural Born Alchemist.
Okay, naturalbornalchemist.com. And do you have a Patreon page?
Yes, it's patreon.com/Natural Born Alchemist. It's all Natural Born Alchemist, and in social media, I think it's only Twitter where it's Born Alchemist. You can't have such a long name.
Right.
Those Twitter bastards.
All right, Alex. Well, thank you for coming on. That was awesome. We got a lot of good stuff. I like, having people on sometimes where I don't know a lot about the topic, and I like to ask questions and get a good grasp on an insight. And it seems like you've done a lot of work with all this stuff. So I appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to listening to more of your podcast.
Thank you. I
that was
appreciate
awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it myself. It was fun.
Cheers.
All right. Well, we'll do it again. We'll find some other topics, and we'll get you back on here some point in the future. So, but thanks for coming on, and you guys have a good day.
Peace.
Thanks.